Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Welcome to a new series for the channel which is going to be spotlighting labels that are really important throughout the music industry's history. So we're going to talk about some really obvious labels, like Today I think you'll find is a fairly obvious label, most of you have heard of it, and then sometimes I'll be spotlighting labels that you may not have heard of before. These are going to be breezy history, so running through the ethos of these labels and some of the key releases and the reason they're possibly still standing today. If there are any particular ones you'd like me to focus on in the future, any particular labels that you really have an affinity for or you want to find out a little bit more about, just comment in the comment section below. And for the first video in the series, I'm going to be talking about Warp Records, global home to some of the most innovative, genre-bending, groundbreaking music to ever snake its way into your dirty ear canal. As always, we have two LPs this week and these are both Warp focused. So tonight on Deep Cuts Discord, we'll be listening to one of the new Autechre live releases that came out last week. I can't remember which one I'm going to be listening to. I'll pick that probably a little bit later. There'll be a link in the description for that. And then later in the week, we're going to look at one of the newer people on the Warp roster, Yves Tumor's new record, which is a fantastic record. Thoroughly recommend it. Come and join us on Monday and Thursday for both of those. And as always, if you feel like you want to donate a little bit of money to Deep Cuts, obviously I don't make that much money off of ad revenue really, but there's a website called Coffee that's in the description if you want to just chuck £3 towards the channel. Most of it goes on books, loads of this increasing books behind me from Coffee donations from all you wonderful people to keep my research going and keep the videos fresh. So if you want to do that, feel free. Time to get warped. Warp Records has an incredible roster of artists, past and present. And you know, if I was stuck on a desert island and I could only listen to one label, it would undoubtedly be Warp. It would just have to be. I mean, you've got Autechre, Aphex Twin, Boards of Canada, Square Pusher, Mount Kimby, Rusty, LFO, Kalila, Brian Eno, Stereolab, Prefuse 73, One Otrix Point Never, Plaid, Battles, Danny Brown, Death Grips, Squid, Nightmares on Wax, Geiker, Clark, and so many more. That logo, designed by Ian Anderson, founders of Designer Republic, with the recognisable globe and the original shade of purple, is something pretty much all music fans identify with, or at the very least recognise. Around the mid-80s there was a lot of stuff coming out, independent stuff, major label stuff, loads of imports, so there was an increasing amount of material on your shelves. They wanted something highly visible, instantly identifiable and collectible. There was nothing about those US label designs at the time that would lend itself towards what we could achieve with something like Warp visually. We had to build up some kind of framework to deliver a mystique about what they were wanting to do. Of course, you don't build a mystique without finding something genuinely compelling to fuel the concept in the first place. So how did Warp position themselves as the go-to conduit for explorative, mind-bending music? It all kicked off in Sheffield, which is a city in the north of England in 1989, historically known for its industrial heritage as so many of those northern powerhouse towns and cities were. Out of the mist and fog and unemployment and Thatcherism came the driving force of northern techno and a couple of friends who just loved the live music scene. Steve Beckett and Rob Mitchell, the two friends in question and founders of the Warp label, they worked in a record shop alongside producer Rob Gordon, who produced a lot of stuff on the FON label, and Robert was actually key in starting up Warp Records in the first place. At the time, I don't think we were setting up a label necessarily. It was more about, let's do this 12-inch and see if it can have an effect, like we were seeing in guys like 808 State and Unique 3. It was all more orientated to the dance floor rather than the label side of things. They were obsessive about the kind of 12 inches that were being imported from Chicago and Detroit, and they would queue up to get these limited pressings that would then be played in Sheffield clubs all over the place. That first ever Warp pressing, The Track With No Name, which I think is a great way to start off a label in the first place, it was produced by Gordon and it is made for the dance floor, but it also has this transient quality, sort of eerie, which adds a new dimension to the insistent techno onslaught. By the way, all the tracks I'm talking about today are in a Spotify playlist I've created. I think it's almost 3 hours long of Warp artists, so check that out if you want something to compare to whilst I'm talking about it. With their second release, they put out the Nightmares on Wax track Dexterous, another techno track, but it had a slightly more relaxed approach to it, again existing in the kind of world that first 12-inch did. These were then part of this refreshing new direction that was coming out of this scene geographically. Sometimes it was known as Yorkshire Bleep or Sheffield Techno, or just Bleep for short, and it's a kind of esoteric tongue-in-cheek, very British sounding version of the music that was being made in places like Chicago, places like Detroit. It had its own sounds. It would sometimes include certain synthetic bleeps and bloops, hence the term, that kind of make you chuckle as much as making you move. And I think that was part of this scene. It was about making things that sounded a little bit odd and a little bit alien, and not always with the cool slickness of the stuff that was coming out of Detroit or coming out of Chicago. And this began to get a lot of traction in the area and further afield. People started to hear about, well, what's this stuff that's coming out of the Sheffield techno scene? And then the first full record released on the Warp label was LFO's Frequencies, a landmark moment in British electronic music and a bloody good time, honestly. Apparently some credit needs to go to Daniel Miller, the founder of Mute Records, and he was interested in what Steve and Rob were doing. They were having some good success, but he said to them, maybe you need to think about how you curate your music going forward. Don't just be obsessed with releasing the latest hot 12-inch techno track, which after a couple of weeks of hot and sweaty Saturday nights in the club, people forget about, but think about how you're going to curate that and build something. You know, similar to that logo, what that logo promises. Think about that process. It pulled us out of the trough where we were just completely skint with no royalties, and it was the point where we turned ourselves into a record label. We really started clocking that that was the way to have a bit of longevity and build artists. As the dance, techno and rave culture scene started opening the doors a little bit and allowing experimental flourishes to creep on in, things started getting a little bit more interesting with this kind of music, and that's where the Yorkshire bleep scene really started to help that happen. But it was happening further afield as well. People were thinking, we can create dance music that has all these different levels to it, and it's a little bit more interesting. And so there's a point where Rob and Steve, in a career-defining move, and actually defining for the genre itself, released a compilation called Artificial Intelligence in 1992. I talked a little bit about this in the Autechre Twin guide that I did, and I think a little bit in the 5 albums to get you into IDM. I've put the link in the description for both of those videos, plus my Autechre guide, which is also fairly relevant to this video. In the sleeve of the release, there was a couple of Q&A forms printed out from some of the contributing artists, just asking them what they think about electronic music, where's the future of it, and all that sort of thing. And one of the contributions was from a very young Manchester duo called Rob Brown and Sean Booth, aka Autechre. When people run dry copying each other, a deeper, more creative music will emerge where ideas and originality will play a major role. Which is basically the mission statement for Artificial Intelligence as a compilation, and also the mission statement for how Rob and Steve wanted to run Warp from there on out. The word intelligent in the intelligent dance music umbrella, subcategory, whatever you want to call it, it is coming from this Artificial Intelligence compilation. That's where the word comes from, and it showcases a tranche of young artists that are bursting from the shackles of convention, the things that have come before, and creating something a bit more considered, a bit more heady. Also referred to Braindance sometimes, which I think is a far more fun and fluid term, and much more fitting for this style of music, and it doesn't have the pomposity of the term intelligence in it, which nobody likes. On this release, look out for Polygon Window by The Dice Man, also known as Richard D. James, who becomes Autechre Twin. That was one of his earlier monikers. A particularly percussion heavy cut called Crystal by Autechre, and then the finale by Dr. Alex Patterson, which is this lovely ambient wash, and he actually is one of the founders of another important electronic group, The Orb. Artificial Intelligence then became a series of releases, like curation within the label. So starting off after that compilation record, you had Surfing on Sine Waves by Polygon Window, aka Richard D. James, a really good early release. Electro Soma by B12, take a listen to the roiling bass on the track Basic Emotion. Ginger by Speedy J, and Autechre's first LP in Cannabula, as well as a second compilation in 1994. People were really getting into this new horizon of electronic music. It was opening up whole new subsections of fan bases, people just really getting into this new heady style of electronic music. It felt like we were leading the market rather than it leading us. The music was aimed at home listening rather than clubs and dance floors. People coming home off their nuts and having the most interesting part of the night listening to totally tripped out music. The sound fed the scene. I think it's fair to say that most of the tracks on the Artificial Intelligence compilation sound like they come from the same house, if you know what I mean. They all feel much of a muchness relatively similar. But the result of putting out a work of such originality and giving artists the chance to do something new, it sort of gives all the artists in the Warp label, in that roster, the confidence to put out whatever they like and the means of which to do that. Now that's such an important thing about Warp. You know, Rob and Steve wanted to engender or encourage artists to do the things they felt were right and just give them the space to do it. And they've done that throughout all the time that the Warp labels existed. And that's the reason you get this striking originality in these different artists and in other different genres as Warp branch out into the noughties and beyond. If you want artists to really discover something new and interesting, you've got to give them the space to do it, and they understood that. It's the reason Warp has been at the forefront of icy cold experimental beats as well as quite dark ambient landscapes. It's just two different sounds coming out of the same year. It's why in '94 alone a listener could listen to Selected Ambient Works Volume 2 by Autechre Twin and just get lost in that beauty of track 3, also known as Radiator, and then the next moment find themselves dissociating entirely from Andrew Weatherall's Sabres of Paradise. Aside from the copious Autechre side projects, EPs, LPs and Autechre's copious EPs and LPs, you know, they were pretty prolific in the 90s, both those artists. You had records that still sound fresh today, like the Supremo chill record Smoker's Delight by Nightmares on Wax, or the arrival of Tom Jenkinson, aka Square Pusher, whose first Warp EP, Port Rhombus' title track. It fuses kind of stargazing fusion with increasingly explosive breakbeats. It was with these artists and these releases that Warp cemented its name further and further into the industry as the ones to watch, the ones that were slightly ahead of most people in the curve, really looking for that brand new thing that was going to hook listeners. And as they released records like Square Pusher's Hard Normal Daddy, Aphex's RDJ album, the hip-hoppy Plaid with Not for Threes, and a signing of a little-known Scottish duo called Boards of Canada, their reputation only grew as a curator for genre-bending, wholly original music. Not content on just opening up people's perceptions orally, they also visually actually did quite a lot, and sometimes melded those two things together. Rob and Steve wanted to support artists also making really interesting things in the visual medium, short music videos that could accompany some of the tracks they were putting out, short films, and eventually feature-length films. In fact, Chris Cunningham provided not one, but two really important and quite terrifying music videos for Warp label artists. The music video to Window Licker by Autechre Twin is now infamous and quite a disturbing short film. Definitely go and seek that out if you've never seen it before. And then with Second Bad Vilbel by Autechre, it takes their sonic terrorism, and what Chris Cunningham does is create this nightmarish glitchscape of images and interference, and it, to my mind, is the best way of visualizing the kind of nightmarish music that Autechre is capable of making. And then there's Chris's short film Rubber Johnny, which is guaranteed to have you running home crying to your parents. It's like some sort of millennial take on David Lynch's Eraserhead. And you can go and find it on YouTube, and yeah, go get freaked out. Actually don't, because we're all in isolation right now. Maybe don't watch Rubber Johnny until you can spend a little bit more time outside just to cleanse your palate after. And as the business expanded into the new century, they started supporting filmmakers trying to get those visions out there, but on quite small independent budgets. So we're talking Shane Meadows with films like Dead Man's Shoes and This Is England and the subsequent TV shows. Peter Strickland's Barbarian Sound Studio, fantastic film, and also that was soundtracked by the Warp label Staples Broadcast. You had Tyrannosaur, Kill List. I mean, so many great films came out in the last sort of 15, 20 years that came from this Warp label film offshoot. And throughout, they seem to remain consistent with giving those filmmakers space, so the exact same way they do with their artists and their musicians, giving them space to create something original and see their vision through to the end. And that is the power of Warp. Eventually, Rob and Steve moved to London in 2000. Very sadly, Rob died in 2001 after a battle with cancer, leaving Steve alone to kind of forge the path of the label into the new millennium. One thing was clear, Steve didn't want to just keep releasing electronic records that sound like Warp, because that seemed to be antithetical to the idea that Warp would be this home for all these people curating and creating these explorative, interesting things. So he wanted to think about how he was going to branch out that style of music and still make it feel like a Warp release. So alongside Boards of Canada, Two Lone Swordsmen, Square Pusher, the Autechre Twins, the Autechres, we have them signing artists like Chick Chick Chick, which yes is 3 exclamation marks, that's actually how you say it. This is a band that wasn't wholly electronic, used more acoustic instruments and vocals, and was actually quite different to some of the stuff that Warp had become known for to that point. I've never been a fan personally. I saw them live once and they were absolutely terrible, but I may have just caught them on a bad day. If you are a fan of let us know in the comments section. Even stranger, in 2005 they signed Maximo Park, who are synonymous with the indie bin landfill of the mid-noughties. Although, to be fair, Maximo Park were one of the better bands of that time, I think. They released a couple of really good singles. But Warp never lost its touch for recognising exciting, new, vital music. And that was so clear when in 2007 they released Battle's first record, Mirrored, which is like this hyperactive math rock record. It was like a kid that sat on the carpet munching far too many E numbers and then just bouncing off the walls. A release like Mirrored sounds nothing like the Warp artist that started it all in the first place, but it has the same intrepid spirit of originality and creation that those releases had. Or Gang Gang Dance's Saint Dymphna, one of the most intriguing bands we ever got in the noughties. I mean, Saint Dymphna's amazing, Eye Contact's amazing as well. That band were releasing some incredible stuff. If you haven't heard that before, definitely listen to that. And it continued and continues to be a place where new and exciting artists can branch out and do something different. Bibio, Flying Lotus, Rusty's Glass Swords, which is a deliriously good record. Of all the places Brian Eno could have gone with that huge legacy that he's amassed over the years, he decided post-2010 to take all of his releases through Warp. We've got One Otrix Point Never's Garden of Delete and Age of. Signing Danny Brown, I think, was one of the most inspired things the label have done in recent times, releasing Atrocity Exhibition, one of the best hip-hop records of all time. And Danny's in the perfect place at Warp. He's not being pigeonholed by anybody, and he's not the kind of artist that wants to be stuck in his ways with certain collaborators and certain styles. So he's there at Warp, just doing his thing. Khalila's record Take Me Apart, which ended up being one of my most consistently listened to records in 2017, and I still listen to it a lot now. It's a sensual, sublime R&B and pop hooks all kind of fused together. A wonderful record. Again, Warp just know who to sign. And looking forward for Warp with their recent signing of Squid, who are, very interesting post-rock, which they hate that term, but kind of post-rock, post-mathy weirdos is the best way to describe them. They put some brilliant stuff out and they are seriously killer live as well. I saw them last year, they were great and had a chat with them. The future of the label just looks incredibly bright for Warp, and I think signing a band like Squid, who are on the cusp right now, they're somewhere where Black Midi were before Black Midi released their debut record. I think it just shows that there is such a bright future for this label. They're going to continue putting stuff out that challenges us and delights us as listeners, and there are very few labels out there that have curated the kind of incredible legacy that Rob and Steve have done together. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my history of Warp records. So many incredible records to listen to there. I mean, if you haven't delved into the catalogue of Warp, just go on their website and see all of the stuff that's on there. They also released their 30th anniversary special box set of remixes and live sets as well from some really great artists, old and new, from the roster. So check that out from last year. They're now 31 years old, Warp Records, which is incredible. But yeah, again, please join me on the Deep Cuts Discord tonight and Thursday for a couple of listening parties. Any other comments you have on Warp, let me know in the comment section. We'll have a bit of a discussion about it. And I'll be back soon. See you then.